Shalom, everybody. My name is Mark Rosenberg. We are very, very appreciative of everyone making time to be here. It is strange times that we are living, no doubt, and therefore I think that I appreciate that we're all gathering here today. I would like to welcome you to Creating Memory, Confronting Our Past and Future. This is an online gathering to prepare for January 27th, which is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. As I said, my name is Mark Rosenberg, and I'm the VP of Diaspora Partnerships at Nefesh B'Nefesh. And for those of you that made Aliyah, all of us have embarked on a personal and physical journey to come home to Israel. I often say that Aliyah is not about the destination, about getting to the airport, but it's a constant aspiration to go higher and strive for more from life. Tonight, we will pause and look to the past as well as to the future as we explore the importance and the power of memory and seek ways to help guide us, especially through these uncertain times that we are currently living in the COVID pandemic. The 27th of January was selected by the United Nations to remember the atrocities of the Holocaust, as it was the day the Allied forces liberated Auschwitz. Israel marks Yom HaShoah Gvura in the spring, the day that marked the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. These dates themselves mark so much about national attitudes to memory. Tonight, we're going to focus very much on personal memories and how they can help us build a stronger future. Nefesh B'Nefesh is proud to present tonight this important initiative, Creating Memory, which I believe will help each of us both reflect and give voice to the lessons and impact of the Shoah. We thought no better way to frame tonight's evening by bringing in Lori Gerson, who made Aliyah almost 15 years ago and lives with her family in Hashmonaim in Israel. She works at Yad Vashem's International School for Holocaust Studies for many years as an educational coordinator and guide. Lori, we're going to ask you. Thank you very much for being with us.
Unmute. Hello, everybody. And I hope you can see me. And I am looking to share my screen. And can everybody see the screen now? Okay. So first and foremost, I very much want to thank Nefesh B'Nefesh for having me here tonight. Like Mark said, I did make Aliyah over 15 years ago with Nefesh B'Nefesh. So it's truly an honor for me to be here today representing Yad Vashem at a Nefesh B'Nefesh event. And so I was asked to speak about memory in the Shoah, which is what we're talking about today, and creating memory. And certainly Mark's remarks that he said were very much to the point of what we're talking about today, and that is a collective memory and personal memory about the Shoah and the two of them together. Now, when we talk about personal memory, we all understand what personal memory is. Personal memory is what makes us who we are. It's the memories we have, but collective memory are the memories that we share together. And as Jews, if we think about it for a minute, we're kind of the kings and queens of collective memory. And what I mean by that is that if we think of like our Chagim, our holidays, for example, let's take Pesach. What do? We are celebrating the fact that God redeemed us from slavery in Egypt. It is a collective memory that we all share together as the Jewish people. And so we already understand what it means to have collective memories together. I also want to point out, though, that if we look a little bit, if we go a little bit back in the Torah, right, that before the story of the Jews being slaves in Egypt, we have other stories. Like if we look in Sefer Breshit, we have other stories, and there are stories of our forefathers, right? But they're very personal stories. We talk about what happened to them, the conversations they had, and it's very interesting when we think about it that a lot of that is recorded for us to read and study. In some ways, it makes us think about the fact that what happened to them and how they behaved is supposed to inform us and who we are and who we become. And so what we see here is that we have personal memories that become a part of our collective memory. It's something that we're very used to doing. Okay, now we talk about memory. I just want to go straight to the people who were there themselves. So I want to bring to you the words of a survivor, Helena Bierbaum. She's a very well-known author here in Israel, and her book, her memoirs, Hope is the Last to Die, were translated into English. And in her introduction to her memoir, she talks about the importance of memory and why we remember. And she brings a beautiful comment there. And if you look down, she says, we have to remember the people who didn't survive. They deserve to be remembered. And then she says, and when I speak about those who did not survive and describe them, I'm trying to give them another hour of life so they can live on in the minds and hearts of those who hear me. And I just thought such a beautiful sentiment that we are remembering people because we are trying to reverse what happened to them. They were killed, they were taken away from us, and we want to give back as much as we can, or in any way we can, a little bit of the life that they led and who they were, and share that with other people. Okay, that's important. Now, of course, we have the words of Elie Wiesel, who tells us whoever listens to a witness becomes a witness. And his words are particularly timely now, because we're right at that point in time where we know that pretty soon we won't have the witnesses with us anymore, unfortunately, as we move years and years away from the actual event. And so he is imploring us. He's saying you have to listen to the witnesses as much as you can, because you then have to become the witness. And if I can, I want to share with you this video, which I hope you can hear it. These are the words themselves of Elie Wiesel. Can you hear the word? Can you hear the video?
We decided to tell the tale.
Let me just make sure that, here we go. Share sound. Okay, let me make sure. I hope that you can hear the video. Oh, you heard it. Okay, great. Okay.
It is because we wanted the world to be a better world. Just a better world. And learn and remember. What is our role? We must become the messengers.
Okay, so Elie Wiesel is saying also we have to be the witnesses, but we have a job. Our job is to make sure that we pass along what we hear, that the personal memories we hear from witnesses, we pass along to other people. Okay, so they become, he says, that we become the witnesses. That's really what he tells us to do. Now, as we move on here, I want to bring to you one more thought about memories. And I have the words here of Donia Rosen. Donia Rosen was 13 years old when she wrote this, thinking that she would not survive the Shoah. She was hiding in an area that's now the Ukraine. She was hiding in a pit in the ground, and there was a woman. Her name was Helena Hirschkorn, and she was granted the righteous among the nations status. She would bring her food once a day, but she didn't think she would make it alone. As a 13-year-old, this is what she writes. She writes, words fail me, but I must write. I must. I ask you not to forget the deceased. I ask you to build a memorial in our names, a monument reaching up to the heavens that the entire world might see. Not a monument of marble or stone, but one of good deeds. For I believe with full and perfect faith that only such a monument can promise you and your children a better future. Okay, so she echoes the words of Elie Wiesel, right? When he said we want to make the world a better place. And she says you need to make the world a better place. You can remember us by making the world a better place. And you can do that with good deeds. So she really really, she and Elie Wiesel together, again, they give us a job to do. Okay, and now as we move on and we think about this idea of personal memories and giving them over, I show you this picture here, and unfortunately, I don't have to tell anybody what this picture is. This is the world we are in now, and it's a difficult time. We see here these headlines, and I'm being very clear. I'm not comparing what's taking place now to what happened in the Holocaust. I'm not comparing the two events. However, we're going through a difficult time. The entire world, we have a world crisis that's occurring right now. Our lives are turned upside down. People are isolated. People are in dire straits. People have lost loved ones. There's death involved. This is a really tragic time for a lot of people. And with all of that, we also have no idea what tomorrow will bring. I know all of us, maybe everybody can agree with me that at this point, who knew it would last this long? And even in Israel, where thank God we are getting the vaccine. We're shutting down the airport. We're in the midst of another shutdown that's been extended.
She has to call up what?
She has to call up who?
054.
Can you
Okay,
dial 054?
And we
1 second.
see that we're going through a difficult
054.
time. And so it is a time where we need inspiration and possibly help coping. And of course, again, the memories of people that they had from the Shoah can, I believe, serve to help us with both of those things. They can be inspirational to us during a difficult time, not the same kind, but a difficult time. And they can also possibly help us while we cope. So I want to bring two examples. The survivors themselves and hear their words that I think will be that might resonate very well during this time. I take you back to Helena Bierbaum, who we saw before, and here's a picture of her when she's younger, not soon after she survived. And I'm taking you, she did survive. Her story is amazing. I strongly encourage you to read it if you can. Again, the book is called Hope Last to Die. And she talks about being in Auschwitz. And she is at this point in Auschwitz, just to give framework to the quote we're about to see, she's lost everyone. She's lost her entire family. She even lost her cousin that she was with. And then she tells us this story. She said, there I met fellow prisoners, a Mrs. Brzova and her daughter Roshka. Both began asking me questions about my life. I told them briefly of my experiences and felt an enormous relief. They listened to my tale with tears in their eyes. And when I left, Mrs. Brzova stroked my head and asked me to visit them whenever I could. We will always find a way. We will help you, she said, pressing some onion and garlic into my hands. Look how she continues. She says, I went back to the barracks as though on wings. It seemed to me my feet were not touching the ground, so light and good did I feel. This is in Auschwitz, and she'd lost everyone. They always welcomed me affectionately and warmly. In those days, I needed affection no less than I needed food. Okay, so why did I bring this example in particular? Because we're living in a difficult time. And here's a story. And if we go back to what Donia Rosa said and back to what Elie Wiesel said, we take these stories and not only do we listen to them, but we try as much as we can to have them inform who we become. And maybe we can see here, even in Auschwitz, what a kind word could mean to somebody, to reach out to somebody. We know people are isolated in their homes. Pick up the phone, call someone you know who might be alone, things like that. So I wanted to bring that example, and I have one more example that I want to bring to you, something I think could be very meaningful today. And again, it's also meaningful because of what's done here. We'll discuss it after we see this little video, but you see here, we have Yad Vashem and we have the Holon Institute of Technology. And Yad Vashem is also struggling with this idea of keeping memory alive and making it relevant, and especially for passing it along to the next generation. At one point, they teamed up with the Holon Institute of Technology and some of the students who were there in their art department, where they were learning the tools they needed to convey visual messages. And so they teamed up with them, and this is the result this is one of the results of that partnership, and I want to share it with you. And it's in Hebrew, So if you're ready to understand Hebrew, enjoy that. And if not, there's English subtitles.
היום אני בן 13. אני חתן הבר מצווה, ואני מוכרח לעשות הכל ולבד. בית הכנסת הוא המחילה שקריתי לי. בידיי חפרתי באדמה עיגול, ותקעתי בו המון זרדים. הרמתי מעט את ראשי, והיבטתי סביבי. לא ראיתי צל, כי צל רואים במקום שיש בו אור. אבל אני ראיתי את כולם. כל הזרדים דיברו אליי. ראיתי אותם כחוגגים סביבי. היבטתי עוד ועוד באותן מצבות קטנות, באותו המון שהיה ואיננו, ורק זיכרונם נשאר.
Okay. Now, on the one hand, it is a very obviously sad memory and sad story, but if we really take a look at it, we'll see that it's a very inspiring story. Again, just like we saw with Donia Rosen when she was 13, writing such a powerful message, here we have a little boy who in his actions sends us such a powerful message of coping with what happened, of showing inner strength and continuing with the life that he knew he should be leading in spite of the dire circumstances. And maybe that's something that could speak to some of us today when we can't do the things that we want to do and we're not doing things that we think we should be doing. I think stories like this can help us and give us strength and inspire us to possibly be more strong for ourselves. The other reason why I wanted to bring this example is because just like we're doing here tonight, you see that this is a memory that was taken by somebody of the next generation. And by using art, by using music, by using all these different ways of expressing the story beyond just the words, we see that to some of us, maybe the story is more impactful because we have these visual things that we're able to see, and together, everything together maybe makes it in a way a memory that's stronger, and now we will have that memory and we can pass it along. And that's what we're also doing here tonight. So that's why I wanted to share that. And of course, we're getting to the end here. We see this image speaks for itself. When we see the flag of the state of Israel against the backdrop of Auschwitz. But I want to show you what Israel and the collective memory we have of Israel meant to some of the people who were in the Shoah, some of the victims. Here we have Carol Deutsch. He was an artist from Belgium. And what you see here is truly remarkable. I hope you can see it up close. Carol Deutsch and his wife, Fella, they were living in Belgium. They had a little daughter, Ingrid. She was about 2 years old. In 1941, it was already getting bad for the Jews, and he was trying to get them out, trying to get them to America. He couldn't do that, and they were looking for places to hide, but they could feel that things were getting bad, and he wanted to make something for his little daughter, Ingrid, for her birthday, for her 3rd birthday, and this is what he made. You see this case, it was a huge, I guess, box that's very ornately decorated, and what was in there, you can see here, were 99 illustrations, and all of them were stories from the Torah, stories from the Bible. They were biblical images. It's interesting that as he felt the pressure coming and as he felt things were getting bad and he had these fatalistic feelings that he might not survive. And the truth is he and his wife Fela did not survive. They went into hiding separately from Ingrid and the grandmother. They went into hiding somewhere else. And Carol and his wife Fela were caught and sent to Auschwitz. And they both died later on. They were both killed later on. And the grandmother and Ingrid did survive, and they returned to the apartment where the family had lived before, and everything was either stolen, taken away, or destroyed, except for this box that they found. And like we said, there were these 99 illustrations there. And it's interesting when we see what Carol left for his daughter. He didn't leave a self-portrait of himself. He didn't leave a portrait of his wife, the parents. He didn't leave that. He left the collective memory of the Jewish people. That is what he wanted to leave his daughter when he felt that there was a chance that maybe they would have survived and she would. And I want to end with this last illustration. He has 99 of them. I only showed you a few here, but he leaves her also with this. Okay, and this is Moshe coming over into the land of Israel. And what we see here is what he's giving over in those last thoughts that he has is that even if we're not a family anymore and we can't be here for you, he's saying you have memories. You have the memories of the Jewish people, and you have a place to go when all of this is done. You have a home. And this is what he gives over to her, which I just think is a beautiful, beautiful message. And so what we see here is that the Jews very much in many ways, we see this over and over again, especially here we see that Carol Deutsch, the father, uses collective memory as a way to give himself strength to pass along to his daughter and to give her strength if she survives, which she does. And so what we want to do is use the same coping devices that they use. So we want to use our collective memory. And now the Shoah, unfortunately, is a part of our collective memory. So just like they used our collective memory to give them strength, we want to use the collective memory that the Jews that had to go through the Shoah left for us. So that's one of the things that we're doing here tonight is we are taking these personal memories that people had and we are sharing them with each other, and hopefully they will now be a part of our collective memory when we think about the Shoah and when we think about ourselves as people, and hopefully they will inform who we become and who we are. So with that, I end my thoughts here today. So I will stop sharing. I hope.
Thank you very much, Lori. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that so much that you shared. The quotes, the audio, and these images really give us so much to think about. And as we especially are going to turn now to think about very much words and poems as we begin to explore this initiative of creating memory. I just want to briefly say that I think it was Shaul Chernikovsky, a Zionist poet, who talked about the power of memory, that if we remembered everything, we'd be cursed and frozen and couldn't move forward. And if we forgot everything, we'd be lost and wouldn't be able to achieve anything. And there's this very delicate balance that we have about it. And I think that's why it's important that we talk about how the activity that these people talk about, the importance of being active in our memory. I just want to make sure that we understand that this is a workshop in a way, and it's designed to really give us the tools. We'll be sharing a copy of this video will be made available in the resources that Lori and that Marty Hershkovitz will be discussing today. And if you have any comments or reflections, please do so into the chat. So we're going to continue, and I'm going to pass over to our host, Martin Hershkovitz, will be carrying us forward.
Okay, thank you very, very much. I would like to start the video, if I could. Okay. So anyways, we were talking about the collective memory and then the personal memory. It is important that somehow we make this journey from the collective memory of how it's remembered within the society to creating a personal memory. And I would like to speak about this journey today. And to start off, I would like for the Chaveret Knesset, the member of Knesset, Michal Kotler-Wunsch, to read the first poem, Magid. Chaver Knesset Kotler-Wunsch is a member of the Blue and White Party. She is on the special chair for drug and alcohol use. And I checked it out. They don't only deal with drug and alcohol use, they also deal with all addictions, and I try to deal with the addiction. She is very active in helping immigration and Olim and human rights. And she is now, if you look at her Twitter account, and she's now trying to create some sort of solidarity about the Olim that we get in the upcoming elections, that we get some sort of power and solidarity, and we can have our voices heard, which is very important for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Marty, and thank you to Nefesh B'Nefesh for creating this very important opportunity to mark International Remembrance, Holocaust Remembrance, as the rest of the world marks it on Wednesday, and we join as well, and our voices should be a part of this very important date, that is the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. I will be reading Magid by Marge Piercy. The courage to walk out of the pain that is known into the pain that cannot be imagined, mapless, walking into the wilderness, going barefoot with a canteen into the desert, leaving bodies by the way like abandoned treasure. So they walked out of Egypt. So they bribed their way out of Russia under loads of straw. So they steamed out of the bloody, smoking charnel house of Europe on overloaded freighters, forbidden all ports. We Jews are all born of wanderers, with shoes under our pillows and a memory of blood that is ours raining down. We honor only those Jews who changed tonight, those who chose the desert over bondage, who walked into the strange and became strangers and gave birth to children who could look down on them, standing on their shoulders for having been slaves. We honor those who let go of everything but freedom, who ran, who revolted, who fought, who became other by saving themselves. And I just wanted to share that in reading this very powerful poem, and I'm very grateful for having been introduced to it, the importance of, as I said, acknowledging the 76th liberation of Auschwitz with the remains of the world, with the international community, and what this means, and the very important sort of realization that it's Nefesh B'Nefesh that realizes the importance of making that link to the rest of the world, so that Israel is not missing from this moment in time that we mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day, in addition to our own Yom Shoah, our own private mourning. It's really important that we understand the imperative to connect to the rest of the world. And I would say that Olim as wanderers, so it's very fitting that it's Nefesh B'Nefesh, and I'm grateful to be speaking here tonight. It's very fitting that Olim as wanderers, as I read this poem and reflected on it, mentioned in the poem, find their home in Israel. And this connects to that incredible, painting that we saw, that is the legacy of Moshe, obviously looking over into where the next, or where home is. And I couldn't but connect it to the parsha we just read, to Parashat Bo, because Moses, the greatest prophet, our greatest leader, actually realized the most important speech he could make as the Jews were living centuries of bondage and slavery was about children and about education and about the horizon, or the further future. And in reflecting on that as an international lawyer, and I'm speaking here tonight as a member of Knesset, but as a member of Knesset that has come into the Knesset with the importance and the imperative of international law, I couldn't but reflect on our role, our responsibility also as Olim and as Jews in the diaspora, to make that connection and to understand the importance and the imperative for never again as a prospective commitment, as one that looks to the future. And in order to uphold that imperative, we must expose all double standards, and we must ensure that the law is implemented consistently and equally to all, lest we too become part of the culture of impunity towards so many regimes. And one last word about that. You know, just this week, we lost Yitzhak Belfer, the last of Janusz Korczak's orphans. And Janusz Korczak understood full well and implemented in his time the saying that's attributed to him, that if you want, excuse me, I'm just going to find it in order to read it, but that he understood, as I said, children and education and looking off into the horizon, and that I can say this in Hebrew, but I don't want to. Here it is. He knew that if you plan for a year, you plant rice. And if you plan for a decade, you plant a tree. But if you plan for posterity, educate a child. And that is what we're here doing tonight. That is the importance of memory and reminder. And that is our role in our generation as fewer and fewer survivors live amongst us. And that is the imperative for connecting to the international marking of this day and not just to our own day, Yom HaShoah. So once again, thank you to Nefesh B'Nefesh. Thank you to what you represent and for all of the Olim who are the bridge to all of those imperatives.
Thank you, Havret Knesset Michal Kotler-Wunsch. I will now, we're talking about, and first thing we talked about was the journey, but we're also talking about a personal journey also. And sometimes you feel that this journey is not something that you can, you're not so sure about the narrative. This is what we're looking for, to try to be sure of what our narrative is going to be, especially when we talk about the Holocaust. And I would like if Becky Handel, who's a third generation, would talk about this unsurety as a third generation, about how to really feel the closeness to the events. And I think Yossi Banai in his poem brings out the questions that we have in general about recalling events that happened long before. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you so much. I'm Becky Handel, and it's such an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me to participate. I made Aliyah about 10 years ago from Fairfax, Virginia, and I live for the past 10 years in Jerusalem, where I work as a clinical psychologist. And I'm going to read this poem. I'm a third generation survivor. My Savta, my grandmother, Ilona Handel, Zichron Livracha, who passed away about 10 years ago, survived the Holocaust in Budapest, Hungary. And I want to read the poem and then tell a little bit about her story and my sense of responsibility and wanting to educate and share her story on. Soon there will be no one to ask, by Yossi Banai. Soon there will be no one to ask if all that was really happened, or maybe, who knows, it was all just some story. Soon there will be no one to ask if the breeze did indeed sway, and with what hue was time tinged, and what flavor were the holidays. Children ask, and we stand with our bundles of our memories and our question marks in the fog of the years and our hearts despair from an answer. So this poem really, really spoke to me. I have countless memories of Savta, both celebrating the holidays and also being the one who heard her story and feeling a sense of responsibility to carry it on. And Savta was a Holocaust survivor from Budapest, Hungary, and I had the privilege when I was in high school. She took all of her children and grandchildren for a trip to meet the woman who hid her during the Holocaust. There are multiple parts of her story. Obviously, I can't, in the limited time I have, go into all of it. But one aspect was that for a few months, her housekeeper, Anush Oros, hid her. And Savta felt it was really important for us all to both see where she grew up in the Jewish community there in Budapest and to honor this woman with the most amazing blessing of seeing all the children and grandchildren that she helped as a result of saving Savta. And I had the privilege on Savta, what ended up being her last visit to Israel, to Yad Vashem. I found where Anush's name is in the garden at Yad Vashem for Righteous Among the Nations. And I showed her where it is, and it's definitely a memory that stuck with me. And I spoke with her many times. She started to tell her story and spoke widely to Jewish and non-Jewish people, both to tell her story of survival, but also messages of hope and strength and resilience, which are so important during these times too. And I will always remember when her telling me, I was like, Savta, why don't you write your story? You know, you're such a great speaker, Ron, you also write. And she said, who knows, maybe you will one day. And I has used extra time in lockdown and different things to this year during Corona to actually finish the book that I've been writing about Savta and her story that I hope to share with you. I'm trying to work on getting it published and hope to share with all of you. And Savta always wanting to come back to Israel. She ended up coming to Palestine after Hungary and seeing the birth of the state of Israel, but for various reasons had to move. My father was born in Haifa, and then they moved to Brazil and then to America. And I'm very proud that the only grandchild who has returned to Israel. And I know it's something that she really hoped and dreamed for. And she knew I was in the process of Aliyah. And I really hope that that we can continue sharing the personal stories and remembering all of also the messages of hope. And I remember when she was at Yad Vashem that last time, she came with her synagogue, and she was always educating, and she was educating the people from her synagogue. And she said, it's not just the suffering that we have to remember going through, but when we come out, we also have to celebrate our Judaism. And I feel like really connected to celebrate that and to also continue sharing her story. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Becky. So I would like to speak a little bit about how we can create this personal memory and how we can attach to the Holocaust remembrance. My family, my mother and father never really spoke about the Holocaust. We never really mourned the people who died. And I felt that using the creative process is a way that I could to add emotional content to actually access the traumatic memory. And in the next slide, we'll see the various stages of creating memory, first of all, I felt that that I had to, could you move a slide, please, Mark? The dawning awareness that there's a narrative that needs to be spoken. Then a protest of the silence, finding a narrative, grieving, and then the redemptive power of creativity. And we're going to be going through my own journey towards Holocaust remembrance via the creating memory process. And first off, I would like to call on Rabbi Ira Grusgat, who is a recent Oleh from Fair Lawn, New Jersey. He's a rabbi and also a second generation. He is going to read a story of the poem Photographs, which are of mine. Ira, please.
Hi, if someone can start my video. Thank you. Shalom. Thank you, Marty. It is a privilege, if not so much a pleasure. The dawning of awareness. Photographs. My cousin Chaim Stern returned to Sedebnia after the war, took the key from the neighbor to return shortly, a shoebox under his arm, and he strode toward the tree grove. The bonfire in the grove burnt the photographs well as he stood over the curling pictures, prodding them deeper, deeper into the flames. The nitrate smoke burned his eyes. He sat in the clearing till the embers died down, then freed, left for America, his spare set of shoes now in the shoebox. My father has put away the pictures from before the war, and he can't find them. But I think he put away the pictures so that he won't find them. What good are these pictures, he says. They were all bloody. And in the posed pictures, they look like statues. Better we should take pictures of our wonderful grandchildren, not bloody and in color. So let's finish the roll, and in an hour we have new pictures, much better. I don't have any pictures of my uncles who died in Auschwitz. Not that it would help much. My uncle Meshulam died when he was 4 years old. I would feel pretty silly holding a picture of a 4-year-old and saying that this is my uncle. It's hard for me to imagine that I had a family at all. I'm not a god that can create a family out of motes of dust. Whenever I would ask about the Holocaust, my parents changed the subject, saying, you have to put the past behind if you want to go forward. After 45 years of all sorts of directions, I'm beginning to doubt their words. I want to respond by sharing first my reaction and then my reflection. I felt an immediate need to identify with Marty. More than sympathize, more than empathize, overtly and overly identify with the author of this poem that moved me. I said immediately, I too had a cousin. Okay, a second cousin, once removed through marriage. I had a cousin, Chaim Stern, from Dikla, not Serednia. And my father, though, didn't put away any pictures at all before the war. That's why he had absolutely no pictures at all after the war of his mother or 3 of his baby sisters before they were all incinerated in the gas chambers, along with their shoes and shoe boxes. Whatever pictures my father, Avram Leiser, managed to smuggle out of Slovakia were in boxes eventually when he returned after 20 years of saying he would never go back. But when he did return, so subsequently he came home with smuggling boxes and boxes of photos and registration census that were actually disallowed in communist Slovakia to be released. So he came back with drawers and drawers of photos that he eventually printed and published in books of remembrance, the book of Bardiev, which my father published. There's only one problem with those photos, Marty. You see, out of the hundreds and hundreds of photos that he did manage to smuggle, only about half of them had names or could be identified. So 50 out of the 100 photos or more were nameless, without identity. So now I reflect and wonder, going back to the poem. With these photos in color, Would they make things much clearer? Would the faces in these photos, smiling, even smiling, make them actually more animated than statues, more everlasting? Would their burning of their images finally liberate their fixed poses frozen in time? And again, I reflect and I wonder as I hear my parents, like Marty's, my parents, most of their survivor friends and family, say the same sentiment, even in the same accent. You have to put the past behind if you want to go forwards. Well, Marty, after more than 45, I would say after 55 or 65 years of being cast about in all sorts of directions, to turn your phrase, with more than half of those years doubting their words of advice, put the past behind, you want to go forwards. But hearing at the same time, in paradoxical contradiction, not their advice, but their command to remember, don't forget. I can only reflect on an admonition and an observation made by Santayana and Kierkegaard. You should excuse my Yiddish and quoting from things that I learned from my parents. Zwei Goyim aber mit Yiddische Cap, couldn't believe it growing up as a kid, that there would be smart advice from a Spanish philosopher and a Danish theologian. So I recall Santayana's admonition: those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And finally, Kierkegaard's astute observation: life is only understood backward, but it must be lived forward. So Marty, my Landsman, my cousin, my brother, who I met about 24 hours ago and spoke for 3 minutes, but I feel that I know you for most of my life. So Marty, your parents, your uncles, your aunts, they were all right. Don't doubt it, no doubt about that. But you too, Marty, were right and are still right, undoubtedly, because you told me that you have children. You doubt, but you write about your doubts. So Marty, take my advice from a Landsman. If you have photos, if you have Polaroids, Instamatics, you can store them, Marty. Not in any shoebox, but you can store it in the cloud. And if you can store those kind of photos in the quote unquote cloud that you can upload and direct forward, then you forget about Santayana, forget about Kierkegaard, reflect upon Chazal, Chachamenu Zichronam Levracha, our sages of blessed memory, in the Yiddish Tatis and Mamas. Reflect upon what our sages who came before any Danish or Spanish philosophers, who had a similarly cynical attitude about photos and images. Tselem. There would be especially with my parents and grandparents from Hungary, who were religious and said, Atzilem, you can't, metunish. You can't take photos, particularly of faces, whose icons and images are proscribed in the stained glass of any shul windows or in concrete tombstones and graves. No faces there. Why? Because ein domeria lishmia, as Chazal tell us. You cannot really compare sights, images, with either the hearing, shmiyah, and even ri'iyah and shmiyah, seeing and hearing, ein dome lekriyah, to reading. Seeing is not believing, unless you can hear something, listen to it, and read as well. So to conclude my reflection and my reaction, the dawning of awareness begins with photos, but it's ongoing illumination and imprint that will sustain awareness, that will enhance awareness, that will preserve awareness, must be preceded, accompanied, and followed by text. So it's not the image so much of a yellow star, but by the black and white letters and words such as are inscribed in our Torah that spell out names and identities of our fathers and mothers, our sisters and brothers, yes, to some even our sons and daughters, communities and congregations, peoples and places that will spelling out with the alphabet and a Shem, which means a name, a legacy, spelling out the directions for Jewish living with its journey as well as destination. These are the signposts, the Aleph, Bet, the Shem, not only the Yad, the sign and the symbol and the images, but the Shem that goes along, that is the text, the DNA for our very identity. And when those texts are the name, the legacy, are not anonymous, they don't go up in smoke, when they are be made through your efforts to develop more deeply than any Polaroids or Instamatics, hopefully they will transform the awareness from its dawning into a deliverance and a shining remembrance, everlasting as a blessing. Amen.
Thank you, Ira. Very touching words. I would like to continue with another rabbi, Rabbi Jonathan Lieberman, who's the chairman of Tchelet, which is for inspiring Judaism, and a up-and-coming Tnuah, which wants to make changes and to bring the halacha closer to the public. Please, he's going to read another poem of protest of mine, Unknown. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Marty, for the introduction. My name is Jonathan Lieberman. I was born in Manchester, England. I made Aliyah about 8 years ago. I have no personal or family connection to the Holocaust. My introduction to the Shoah was as a teenager. I was a voracious reader. And as a young teenager, 13, 14 years old, I was introduced to the novels of Leon Uris. And I read the novels Exodus, QB7, Mila 18. And as I cried myself to sleep night after night, having read chapter after chapter of the most horrific scenes that were described by that wonderful author, this was my introduction to the Holocaust. And the poem that I have chosen, also written by Marty, is called Unknown, Unowned. It's a short poem, and I'm going to read it to you. And then I'm going to give you some reflections of my own. If, as the rabbis say, each life has a meaning, then each death should have its meaning too. A tear, a shiver, a murmur of blessed memory after a name. Even just a glimpse of a memory, like the flicker of a lamp. But a death unmourned, unnoted, is a cruelty that should never have been created. It is a cruelty beyond flames, beyond dust. This is the poem which describes the unowned, the unnamed victims. Out of 6 million victims of the Shoah, quite amazingly, the names of 4.7 million of them have been documented by Yad Vashem in an attempt to prevent the tragedy that this deeply, deeply disturbing poem describes. Of course, that leaves 1.3 million unnamed, unknown, unowned victims. It is to these tragic, unnamed korbanot that the poem refers and tears at our hearts with its directness, its simplicity, its matter-of-factness about a subject which is anything but mundane and matter-of-fact. Our rabbis tell us that Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, our forefather, did not die. Clearly, on a physical level, that is not true. He was embalmed and taken from Egypt to the land of Israel to be buried in Hebron. But what the rabbis mean is that Jacob didn't die because his legacy lives on. He passed the messages of his life, the lessons learned, the ethos of the family, the things that were important to him. These he passed on to the next generation. And through the chain of transmission, Jacob lives on. The overwhelming tragedy of the most horrific event the world has ever witnessed is that inability to pass on memories, traditions, family stories, lifestyles, values, to pass them on to the next generation. As Marty's poem so clearly and directly and incisively tells us, like a dagger to the heart, there are 1.3 million people. 1.3 million. For those in the UK, that's the entire population of Birmingham. For those in the USA, that's double the population of Boston, Massachusetts. For those in Israel, that's 15% of the entire population of Israel. And they are just part of a terrible statistic. As Marty puts it, they are unowned. And this is a cruelty beyond flames. They have no legacy at all. So what can we do? What can we do to change that? Well, Yad Vashem are doing an amazing task to try and reduce that number of unowned and unknown victims. But what we must do is to own as many of the victims as possible and preserve their memory. And there are many ways we can do this. I want to share with you something that my own family have done. My son, who is a rabbi in Perth, Australia, has started a boxing club for the members of his community. And he's named the club the Victor Perez Memorial Boxing Club. And you can see that there on the screen now. That's the logo of his boxing club. It's named after Victor Perez, who was murdered on the death march from Auschwitz 76 years ago last week on the 22nd of January, 1945. And here's a photo of him in his prime, from which the boxing club logo was copied. Every single child or adult who registers with the Victor Perez Memorial Boxing Club gets a little card with his picture on, with that logo on. And they get lessons in how to box. But most importantly, they get a lecture about who Victor was, where he came from, what he achieved, and how he was murdered. And this is what we must do. We must take ownership of our lost ones, because to be unknown and unowned is indeed, as Marty writes, a cruelty that should never have been created. Let's take a memory, let's take an individual, let's own them, let's bring them into our family, into our lives. And even on the other side of the world, as far as Perth, Australia, let their memory be for a blessing. This entire project of creating memories, of establishing memories, This is what's important, because as the previous speakers have said, it's now our turn, our next generation and our children's generation that must carry on and make sure that this cruelty that should never have been created is never created ever again. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Jonathan, for your inspiring words. I would like now to introduce my sister Nancy. She's an attorney from Maryland, and she is going to read my poem Ineffable, which, as Rabbi Ira spoke about and Rabbi Jonathan spoke about, the idea of having to find the words and writing down the words. And I'm so impressed that Becky, as a third generation, has taken upon herself also to write the words, because this is exactly what creating memory is about, finding the words. So Nancy, if you would please read the poem Ineffable.
Hi. Am I allowed to do my video?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you. Oh gosh. It's
Start
not
video.
okay. Sorry, I've been having a little bit of technical problems. Mark has been helping me, and I think we're doing well. Yes, I'm Marty's oldest sister, and I'm very honored that he asked me to read one of his poems. My search for a narrative, ineffable. In the face of the ineffable, there can be no words, they say, only silence. But my life has been measured by decades of silence, not mere kilometers. So the crunch of flagstones, the swirl of winds, even the tears are no stead. Here in Auschwitz, silence will not suffice, for when words return, they return as they were, like seeds scattered on the frozen ground. But if a voice can rise from the desolation, to parse therewith a syntax of the pain, then words in tune shall resurgent flow, words whose tears may heal the soul again. I think I have a special insight into Marty's poetry because I am his sister, because I grew up in the same home he did. And Marty has said that we were forbidden to talk about the Holocaust. I think forbidden is a very strong word. I think it was even sadder. There was silence even about the silence. We did not talk about why we did not talk about the Holocaust. It was just such a deep grief and such a silence. Many people do not know that our parents were cousins. So my mother's loss, she was in the concentration camps. She lost everyone but a cousin, but an aunt and a sister. The three women survived together somehow. And so all of her loss was also my father's loss. But he had come to America when he was 11. But from the age of 4 to 11, my mother's grandparents raised my father, who were also his grandparents. So in a very, very sad way, his loss was her loss and her loss was his loss. I think part of the reason my father couldn't talk about it is because he felt he had joined the Navy. Clearly he wasn't able to save any of his family. And I think he always felt that the rest of the family had failed the family that was in Europe. We did not save them. We did not help them when they needed us most. And I think he felt that was a failure. But he didn't want to talk about it because that's not, he had a very strong concept of what real men do. Real men don't complain. They don't cry. I think this was very hard, particularly on Marty, because Marty is a very sensitive and empathetic person. And my father could not tolerate any sort of weakness, vulnerability. So part of it was that he felt it would be not manly, and there was a benefit to it. He went into the war. He tried to kill Nazis, almost got killed himself, came home, and then tried to make a living for his family. What will talking about this horrible tragedy feed anybody's mouth? Or, you know, he just couldn't conceive of why that could be useful. And I mean, there is, you know, and we all grew up. But I do feel that he felt that he has failed, that he and everyone in the family had failed, those who were left behind. And I want to acknowledge my appreciation of what Marty is doing. I'm pretty busy trying to keep my mother in a reasonable situation. She's 96. She's 95. She's still alive. She's very seriously dementia, and trying to keep her health, you know, clean and well fed, 24/7 care. And so I'm doing my best to help her survive for as long as she can, with a modicum of respect and dignity. But Marty's trying to save those we lost. He can't save them physically, but maybe he can do what my father failed to do, what the rest of the family failed to do. He's trying to save their memories and bring them out of the shadows and bring them out of the darkness and bring them out of forgetfulness. And it's painful, but I do appreciate, Marty, what you're doing.
Thank you.
Because, you know, somebody should do it, and I'm glad you're doing it. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy, for your words. So we're talking about creating a memory. And sometimes out of the silence, it's difficult to create a memory. Sometimes you just have a name. And from that name, you try to create memory. And that's for my grandfather, my mother's father. I had just a name, but I realized how limited the single name is. I would like to call on Helena Bierbaum, who is the executive director of the Lookstein Center for Jewish Education of Bar Ilan, to read the poem names. Helena.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. Names. My mother's father was named Mordechai Kleinbart, but maybe because he was the eldest son, his mother called him Tatala, and his father probably called him Mordechai, like my father called me. His sister and brothers called him perhaps Moti, except for his baby sister, who called him Momo, even after she grew up. His wife's cousin at the winery may have called him Kleiny, and his children surely called him Tati, as did his wife, except late at night, alone in the bedroom, she would maybe call to him with Yiddish familiars in a soft, erotic lilt. Or maybe not, because Mordechai Kleinbart is the single name I have, and it alone is carved into stone and molded into bronze. All the other names exist only in memories long interred or on pages yet unwritten. So the first time I read this poem, it brought to mind the first list of names that I ever encountered. Every Tisha B'Av, when I was growing up, which is Tisha B'Av is the day that we commemorate the destruction of the temples, my father, who is a child survivor, would bring out what we kids called the telephone directory, the telephone book. And it was as big as a telephone book, this physically, but that's where the resemblance ended. It was a list of first names and last names and places of birth and date of deportation and place of deportation and place of death. And it was a list of all the Jewish French victims of Nazism. And it was a photocopy collection of Nazi records that included my grandfather's name and his siblings and their spouses and their children and their in-laws and all sorts of other assorted relatives. And it was from this book, this telephone directory, that I actually learned the names of all my family. And similar to what Marty and his sister spoke about, in my house when I was growing up, the Holocaust was something that, that I couldn't engage with. It was ever present. It was always there, but it was a closed box. It was hermetically sealed. It was only opened to survivors. If they wanted to say something, they were able to say something, but the rest of us had to be silent. And that's really how I processed the Holocaust until many decades later, I was able to speak to Marty. And he had this similar experience, I mean, presumably much more intense than mine, but he had figured out a way to work through his hurt and to process. And during one of our conversations about grief and guilt and all sorts of other emotions, he literally gave me the permission to process these emotions as an individual. Like I said to him, do you give me permission? And he said, I give you permission. And that was extremely meaningful to me. And I say me, but really he gave all of us this permission, sisters and brothers and cousins and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and just the community at large, the framework for reflecting and for processing and for moving through this tragedy in a way that was humble and respectful and personally meaningful. At the Lookstein Center over the past year, we've had the opportunity to share with educators around the world this framework, this creating memory framework. And it's really important to explain that teachers have a very hard time teaching about the Holocaust. They have a hard time teaching about the Holocaust, commemorating about the Holocaust, speaking to children about the Holocaust. And this framework has given them the freedom to do it better. They've transformed this feeling of children just being passive recipients of really this national tragedy and making them actively reflecting and concretizing and identifying with certain themes and then producing their own creations, taking a little bit of themselves and putting it into something, putting it out there into the world through whatever creative, method they choose. So Marty, really what I want to do is thank you for taking your own, I guess, grief experience, extrapolating it, having a vision that this could be redemptive for others and really giving everybody the opportunity to do that. I think that Jewish history as a whole, we know is we have times of joy and we have times of sorrow, and it's very hard when we're in comfortable times. Even during Corona, it's relatively comfortable. No one's out there gunning at us in the way that they were decades ago. It's hard to relate to that sorrow, and I think you've really given a gift. This framework is really a gift for educators out there, for all sorts of educators out there, to work with the next generation to help them process and personalize and connect to this. So thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Wonderful words. So I would like to continue with the idea of creating a narrative and have my friend and intellectual property lawyer, Alan Shankman, read the poem Mince, which also refers to a single sentence that my mother said, and me trying to create a memory out of that. So Alan, could you please read?
Marty, thank you. And I want to thank Marty for including me in this evening in what is really a remarkable program. So kol hakavod, thank you. Mints. When I asked about her grandfather, my mother said he gave his grandchildren mints. Then silence. Not if the mints were azure blue or white, not if the peppery scent of their breaths, not if the toddler cries because he would not get, just mints. It is left for me to imagine my uncles crunching impatiently the hard candy when they tired of letting it dissolve, as I would a generation on. Beautiful poem. In an inversion of Proust's Madeleines, what does one do when a single memory of food cannot evoke 4,000 pages of remembrance of things past? When food memories have associations, they can raise an entire world. What happens when those memories are sucked out? Can one impatiently bite them to release the flavor before they dissolve entirely? The mints of my grandmother that I knew are different from the ones of the grandmother I never met. The ones of the one I knew do contain a whole world that include her and her family. What happens when the mints alone are the whole world, and when the world remembered contains a black hole as its center? The blue is your mints also evoke an era. It's generational. Those candies that stood in jars on coffee tables, wrapped in plastic, hard, inedible, sometimes stuffed in pockets and at the bottoms of purses, yet reassuring and comforting that they were there. Sour balls or butterscotch candies, if they were not those hard blue mints wrapped in cellophane. Taste brings comfort, foods, and memories, and ones that I deliberately seek to invoke. The mints that I try to create for my children, small raisin boxes, and for my grandchildren, Bamba, the muffin, Ron's bazooka, a Kinder Egg. That thing that they know to go to the pantry to find, the thing that I press into their hands after they visit as they are leaving, as a memory of me, and as a talisman, a form of chamsa, I press into their hands to protect them and to show love. How does Marty create whole worlds in the me of memory when even that memory is at best Nancy Drew clues, Hansel and Gretel breadcrumbs in the forest, the crumbs laid down by the single image mints, and then the silence of the forest that follows? Like the negative space in a painting defining the shapes that are missing. I read that when Tibetans were being forced into exile, the Dalai Lama interviewed a number of rabbis to ask, what do you do when your home is gone, your world destroyed? And he was told, in essence, you create story and bring ritual into our homes and make it real. Moses telling the Jews to create story to their children, to create memory, to create identity. Like the ritual of the Pesach Seder, that story, that memory needs grounding in specific tastes, the matzah, the moror. And what if the memory reconstructed is not so accurate with the reality of what might have been? It doesn't matter. In the South, we learn it's a good story that in the end is more real than the facts. As Mark Twain said, never let truth get in the way of a good story. It doesn't matter because this is memory, not history. And in the end, it matters less what kinds of mints and knowing how they were consumed, rather how we take in what we take in. The impatience in which Marty devours and the association, identification with imagining that his uncle would also actively, impatiently, dynamically, vigorously swallow but absorb the world. And like his uncles, Marty wishes to savor the flavor and does not wish to let this world just dissipate. What I also love is that Marty does not have dead saints sucking on the mints. They bite impatiently and in doing so become all the more human and real to us. Marty's chewing the mints rather than patiently letting them dissolve. The family mannerism that may have become mine, his, because we can assume and write that they are the family mannerisms, the me in the filled in memory, the impatience in forging memory, so that it doesn't just dissolve. Also, while the memory story of the grandfather What is created is evoked really as the memory of the children, the toddler, the uncles, not a further image of the grandfather. Marty's grandfather has done his job in providing the mints. We each want to do our job of being the link in the chain and passing something on to the next generations. We, none of us, want to be the weak link that breaks the chain. So how do we forge our own story link when the one before me is missing? And while I understand Marty may feel how hard it is to feel part of a chain when the links before it are cut out or missing, notwithstanding, we can sense the power of the chain that he is, as he is reforging these links, even as he serves as a chain to the next generations. It is challenging to forge both your own link and try to reforge the ones that came before you. In some ways, it's like the cartoon character who steps off the cliff and only falls when he sees that he's standing in the air. Instead, here, Marty remains suspended, managing to reforge the link that's missing while still being part of a strong chain, even where that link is an ephemeral image, as ephemeral as the taste of the mints. And in doing so, in a sense, memory creates simultaneously both forward and retroactively. And the process is nothing short of alchemy. Mints into memory, dross into gold. Thank you, Marty.
Thank you, Ellen. Amazing. I forgot, I failed to mention that before she became a lawyer, she was an English literature major at Barnard. So I'm not surprised at the erudition that she showed. So anyways, so there's a problem with creating memories. The problem is that, as Ira showed you the photographs without names, you sort of feel that you're creating a fiction. You know, you're working so hard to create a memory, but at your basis, you may feel there's a little bit of falsehood in it. And I would like to call on Sharon Weiss-Greenberg, who's the Director of Educational Partnerships at My Jewish Learning, to read the next poem, Names and Stories, which talks about this this problem that I encounter when creating memory, and all of us encounter when creating memory.
Marty, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for doing this. Can you
something
hear me?
Ira sent me, something called creating memory.
Search for a narrative, names and stories. Some of us have only names. Names are good for reading at memorial services and putting on bronze plaques in the synagogue next to a flickering bulb, which is almost as good as mourning. Some of us have stories without names. Names have been removed from the story like things so that it can no longer hurt the storyteller. So I'm destined to tell the story over and over again, unsatisfied. Sometimes I feel like putting the names in column A and the stories in column B, like the test we took in grade school. 1, George Washington, and C, first president of the United States. Drawing a line between the story and the name. So every story has a name and each name has a story. And on Remembrance Day, I can feel I am mourning a real person, not just a name without a past or a story without an identity. And I can hope that the tears fall more freely. But if I match imperfectly, I have mourned a fiction, a phantom who existed only in my manipulations, and I have wasted the day. Or do the dead know how to lift the tears from the page on which they have fallen and carry them in cupped palms to the proper page? These words really spoke to me as someone who was always, I grew up in a different generation. I'd say I'm third generation. Most of my father's my father's parents' generation perished during the Holocaust. 3 out of 10 siblings survived, and 2 having fled before the Nazis invaded Hungary. So 1 made it through the Nazi regime itself. And when I think about what is my role, and what things were like in terms of my growing up, we were flooded with stories of the Holocaust. So many stories, but so many stories without names, and so many names without stories. And I can remember so many, detailed narratives of how people survived or how they perished and what people fought for and what people stood for. But they're people. I can't tell you who they were. I can't tell you any more about them besides the snippets of resistance or strength or not. And in thinking about, what is creating memory, and what is the purpose of that? And I was thinking, in terms of this poem, does this do justice to the dead? And does this properly honor them? And it seems like the emphasis when it comes to our work here and our role and our achrayut, our responsibility, it's not necessarily to do justice, because that's impossible. It's not necessarily to honor. It's to remember, which is in many ways greater. It's one thing to go ahead and throw a plaque up and to make a donation, but it's much harder to wrestle with and struggle with preserving memory. What does that mean? What is its purpose? What does that mean in terms of what they would have wanted and what we feel like we need to do, what our responsibility is for us and also for the next generation. And one thing that I was thinking about, I was the first person from my family to make the journey to go to Poland, to go to various death camps, to go to and see the remains of the Jewish life and also camp deaths. And one of the places that I visited was Treblinka, where you don't see a memorial full of names, you see a memorial of names of communities. And in reading this poem, I thought of that. I thought about who are the individuals, who are the communities, who were they? Not just, and not to say just, but who were they entirely? What were their communities like? What were their contributions? How were they influencing the society? What were their families like? There's so much that we don't know. But ultimately, Judaism is a religion that requires us to zachor, and we have that when it comes to Mitzrayim, to Egypt. We have it when it comes to a variety of different Jewish responsibilities, the mitzvot and the Torah. And the way that we do that is not written out in black and white for us. We're required to remember, and we innovate in ways to do that, and that's what Marty's doing here. We created the Seder for Pesach, and we go ahead and do a number of things throughout the year daily to go ahead and remember, and that requirement to do that is something that we live with, and we need to, and we struggle with, and I hope that we continue to do so, that we remember the names, remember the stories, and that we wrestle with what memory truly looks like. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. And I agree with you that the dead indeed know how to take the tears that fall, and that there's no such thing as a wasted memory. And the whole idea of all these poems and creating a narrative is to eventually feel that I had a family and that I had relatives that were maybe before unknown, but now are part of my family, and that I can grieve for them. And sometimes when family never existed, in the stories of in our family, sometimes just realizing that they died is proof that they once existed. And I would like to call on Beth Shamgar, if she's here, to read the next poem, Ergo Sum, which is a takeoff on Descartes about the idea of grieving. Ergo Sum. Okay, it seems that Beth is not here, so I'll read it. Ergo Sum. The relatives who died in the war have faded in and out of our lives. Not alive, not even the littlest bit alive, but then not dead, gone or lost in the war, maybe once or twice mentioned as dead or killed, but this is stated with such dispassion that it seems not quite true. But these wraiths, neither alive nor dead, have a prevalence beyond persons here or gone. So I'm going to Auschwitz to give them life, to find them in the ledgers and within the lagers, beneath the piles of shoes and amid the ashes. For you cannot be destroyed unless you were once alive. So amongst the destruction, I will prove their existence, like a latter-day Descartes. You were killed, therefore you were, and I will grieve. So I would like to talk further about grieving via the next poem, which is going to be read by Rabbi Noga Brenner Samya, who is the executive director of Hillel Israel. I also noticed that in the participants, her father, who is a poet, also and a Holocaust historian, so and a theologian. So you know, showing my poetry off to another poet, especially one as learned as Reeve. So I mean, I have a big task, and she has a big task ahead of her. So thank you, Noga.
It's my pleasure, but I actually prepared to read the following poem. So if you can move the slide one poem.
Oh, no, this is, oh, I'm sorry. This is Yael. This is Yael. Yael is reading this, is Yael Stadman, who's a poet and a psychologist. I don't have the list in front of me, is going to read Tears. She has just written, she's a new poet. She came out with a new book, and she is also a third generation, and also happens to be my daughter-in-law. So please, Yael, if you could read Tears, I would appreciate it. Yael? Is she here?
I am. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
But I was thinking that maybe Rabbi Noga can read it, and both of us maybe can talk about it, because as I was reading it, I was just telling Yaakov, your son, my husband, that some of these words, my English is so rusty. So when I read it to myself, I thought, oh, that's going to be such a piece of cake to read it out loud. But I'm sure you will do a better job than me, reading it out loud, and then we can.
Yaakov will read it.
No, Rabbi Noga will, and then maybe I don't know if you prepared something. You read it, okay, and then I'll talk about it.
Okay.
And you can, and Rabbi Noga can talk about it too. Can share the stage.
Okay, the souls of the dead lie dormant under the dusky cloak of years, in anticipation, like a child hiding beneath a blanket waiting to be found. Our cries of protest do not move them, nor do our howls of indignation. They huddle yet tighter. But when we whisper their names and cry tears of longing they have yet to know, then the warmth of the tear caresses their foreheads, and they blink open their eyes, astonished, and stir themselves, loosening their limbs to fly down to our dreams. Okay, take it away.
Thank you. Okay, Rabbi Noga, would you like to say something first?
No, I'm going to speak about the next poem.
Oh, okay. All right. So thank you, Marty. Kerasis. Okay, now I know. I love this poem. I think the word that comes to my mind when I read it, and when you read it now, is actually responsibility, or I don't know, maybe there is a better word in English, but I was thinking of one of the parashot that we lately just read, when God hears the crying, the shout out of Bnei Israel in Egypt, and something about that specific time, something about the way that, something about that their tears had awoken him or had made him, do something, reach out. And when it tells us the story, it says, Gam ani shamati, about the fact that God heard their pain. And the question needs to be asked, right? Why Gam? Why also me? Also I heard. Who heard besides God? Why do we need this also Gam? And this is something that I heard, so I have to say, from a very special woman named Tamar Weiser, who gives Parshat Shavua every week. And she said that before God heard their tears or their pain, they heard one another. And this is the also I heard, or Gam Ani Shamati. So the first stage to make a change happen, to start Tikkun Olam, to start fixing the world, is to reach out to one another. And when Marty talks here about how it's not the protest, it's not the howl that will kind of make these beloved dead people come back to life. It's the tears, the whisper of their names. So in other words, as I understand it, it's acknowledging their existence, their essence, their mahut, who they were, their identities, which is, I think, something really great that Marty's trying to do. Really, we remind us all of the people behind. I think a name is not obviously just the name, it's what everything that it holds. And then what happens at the end of the poem is these, they're able, the dead, to come, and they come to us, they come to our dreams. So by remembering their names, they become a part of us, they become a part of our unconsciousness, they become a part of the way that, of our existence, a part, in a way, of this world. So we can bring them, not God, because he can't do that anymore, or he can, but it's through us, it's through our dreams, it's through our remembrance, when we talk about them, when we say their names, this is how we keep them alive. And this is the first step forward to Tikkun Olam. So thank you, Marty, for this opportunity. And this is, I guess, my wish and my, what I hope for through these evenings and through remembering.
Thank you, Yael. We're running a little bit late, so we'll go straight into the next poem about blessings with Noga. I already gave her the introduction, so go for it, Noga.
Toda rabba, Marty, and thank you so much for having me. Seeds of redemption, blessings. At the bus stop, he pointed at me. I turned my head. Undaunted, he approached and took my hand, his silver-framed glasses askew. Let me finish my say, then you can speak, he said. May God bless you 3 blessings. That you join in the building of the 3rd temple, that you live to see your children and grandchildren under the wedding canopy, that all your enemies be vanquished. I am mentally ill. Please give me some money so I can go to Yechezkel's grocery and buy some food, which I did. Some would dismiss this incident, but I have not. You see, my mother stood on the frigid ground of Auschwitz, whose cursed soil petrified the spirit of generations. And I like to think that now God sends his peculiar messages to bless me, to resuscitate my soul. And this beautiful poem is really kind of biblical in a sense. And I love this dance that Marty does between the biblical and the modern. I mean, first of all, it's biblical in that it's so in its density, right? It gives so much, such a really powerful story in such a short little text, which is what we find often in the Bible. But I also love that he evokes so many biblical images, right? Starting with Yechezkel, the prophet, which of course in the poem is in the form of the grocer. But in the Bible, he is the prophet that actually, first of all, his name means Yechezkael. He's strength from God, or giving strength. God gives us strength, but it also has in it the word Yechezkel chaza, lachzot, chizayon, which means, of course, vision and prophecy. And Yechezkel was the prophet that actually witnessed his prophecy being fulfilled, which was the destruction of Jerusalem. And here we're seeing a prophecy that we all as readers, along with the writer, hope that will come true, right? This prophecy of hope, of joy, which is building the third temple, which is having our children come into the chuppah, which is the ultimate symbol of joy and of love. And of course, having our enemies vanquished. But it's all up to us, right? If we're able to see it, right? As Harav Paul Simon says, the words of the prophet are written on the subway walls and the tenement halls. It's up to us to see the miracle in the mundane, right? Avram Yoshua Heschel talks about the miracle in the mundane, the miracles in the everyday. He says the sense for the miracles which are daily with us is the source of prayer, which of course this poem is what it is essentially a prayer. And a miracle, a miracle in Hebrew actually is the word nes. Nes really means it's a sign, right? It's a flag. It's not necessarily alluding to anything heavenly or anything outworldly, or it's just anything that engenders a sense of awe and of mystery, which it's up to us to recognize in the world around us. But I will allow myself, because Rav Marty brought up my father in this, and my father, Rabbi Reeve Brenner, is a Holocaust scholar, has written the book, The Faith and Doubt of Holocaust Survivors. But actually he's also a poet. And I just want to read a short entry from one of his poems, because the theme that Marty has here spoke to me, which is why I chose this poem. His theme of three, right? Three blessings. And I'll read the third stanza of a poem of my father that he writes about his grandfather. So he's the third generation, and he calls it Zeta Revin, 1, 2, 3. A third continent, a third generation, with Revin's words stretched out like a tether between them. Sure, he'd say, sure, we Jews will have a homeland. Sure, and the Tsar will be overthrown and men will mock the moon. Sure, thrice he'd laugh. Three positives, which meant a negative for him. A dream, a miracle in which he couldn't believe. I tossed the miracle back at him like a lasso, and laughing thrice myself, pull tight and yank my dybbuk toward me. Behold, the dreamer cometh. But Zayde, your grandson Revin's third child was born there, a Sabra Zayde. It's all come true, Zayde. Round 3 to Revin. So of course, I am that third child, born a Sabra, made Aliyah over a kind of back and forth my whole life, and have the zchut, the privilege to be, as Marty writes in his poem, the one to build together with my ancestors, the memory of my ancestors, the third temple, which I will allow myself to put in quotes when I referring to the sovereign Jewish and democratic state of Israel. And I too stood under a chuppah here in Israel and pray and hope that my children will as well. And will end in my own prayer. May our enemies be vanquished, but may enemies of peace around the world be vanquished for everyone. Amen. Toda rabba.
Okay, thank you. The wonderful words, Anoga. I would just like to add that, of course, the idea of peculiar messengers is based on the rabbinical saying that since the destruction of the temple, the prophecy has been given to children and to the mentally ill. So this is what the basis of that, of the idea that when this person came up to me, and it's based on a true story. I immediately thought of that rabbinic saying. I would like to finish. I mean, we've gone over time, and First of all, if Beth is here and she wants to comment on the Ergo Sum poem, I would like that. Can we find Beth and have her comment on the poem? And no, so let's go to Legacy, the final poem. I will call on Mel, who's an inventor, a musician, a publisher. He's also a high-tech. He has a site called Our Books, in which you can find all my poetry. And he's a big supporter of mine, and I love him. So we're finishing off with Mel and my poem, because I think that all of us have a legacy to remember the Holocaust and to write about it. So Mel, could you please read this poem, Legacy?
Yes, and Marty, thank you so much. I'm going to be brief. This is a wonderful poem of yours. Legacy. The vitriol that is my legacy has scored my soul, leaving me life-tired and forlorn. But it has etched upon my soul, beneath the bitterness and the pain, vistas of sensitivity that I was born to reveal, yet fear. I'll just say, Marty, that I want to be very brief. The word legacy comes from the Latin legatus, which is a delegate, an ambassador, but above all, a leader. And you are playing this role, and I congratulate you for this. And as my Zayde on my mom's side used to say, that the important thing of being a Jew is zu sein a Mensch. And as I've told you before, you fit that category. Du bist a Mensch. So thank you very much, and may God bless you and everybody else.
Thank you, Mel. If you want any more information, well, here's a couple of sites, one in English, one in Hebrew, that you could go to and see. I would love to stay on and talk to whoever wants to talk to me to discuss what's going on. We've been here already almost 2 hours, so I can understand that we sort of need a break or whatever. But you know, if it's possible to have, if people want to maybe send out a link for a different Zoom meeting, that anyone who wants to join in and have a discussion, or if it's not possible, we just send in stuff. I'm looking forward to Yom HaZikaron LaShoah. Then I expect the 150 people who were here today to write their poetry and write the stuff that they have to say. And that's going to be the Nefesh B'Nefesh's program, because whatever, I've opened up the door, and now everyone else has to take their turn and write what they have to write, and that's going to be our program in a couple of months.
And definitely share the story. I also want to add on in the thank yous very much to Marty Hershkowitz, who is a friend and supporter of us, but really much to both Marty and his wife Pearl for going out of their way to make sure that these tools and support is out there. I think that echoing, I think something that Hannah Gurman said, I think that you have particularly shown how one individual story can really open up so much. And each of us are on our journeys, or carry our relatives' journeys, or our families and our people's journeys with us. It's really, really special. We encourage you to follow up at these groups. If you do have a question or a comment that you want to share, people have shared comments from around the world. We had some people from Europe and in North America as well. We encourage you to do that. And we were going to be opening up a different format. Again, hard to believe, only in about 3.5 months' time, a little less, when we will get ready for Israel's marking of Yom HaShoah Ugvura. We really want to thank you very much to all of our participants. And especially thank you to Marty for sharing yourself. Incredible, so much that we discussed, and so much to take forward as we mark on the 27th, in 2 days' time, International Holocaust Remembrance Day.